Hello and welcome to Comic Culture. I'm Terrence Dollard, a professor in the Department of Mass Communication at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. Today we're going to be talking about HeroesCon. The 35th annual HeroesCon was held in Charlotte in June 2017. Now, HeroesCon is my favorite convention because it focuses on comic books, manga, comic strips, and cosplay. The only celebrities you'll meet are the men and women who work on comics. Now, it might not have the flash of the San Diego Comic-Con, but it has amazing vendors, artists, and fans who share a mutual love of comics. This year, the Comic Culture crew was able to spend 3 days at the con meeting and interviewing legends and today's hottest talents, plus up-and-coming creators, fans, and vendors. Now, before I begin, I'd like to thank this year's crew, Jamie Liddy, Aaron Varnum, and Michael Liddy, for giving up a weekend to help make this episode possible. Jose Luis Garcia Lopez is, without a doubt, a true master of comic art. Working almost exclusively for DC Comics, Jose's work includes some of the most recognizable images of Batman, Wonder Woman, and Superman. If you've ever bought a t-shirt, a lunchbox, or an action figure with a DC character, chances are it was from DC Style Guide and was drawn by Jose. I asked Jose how he's able to tell a story for just basically a single image, whether it's a cover or a character guide image.
Well, in the case of licensing stuff I do for DC, you're not telling a story. You are just showing off the character, okay? But yes, in a cover you have to tell the story, but not nowadays. Nowadays it's just a pin-up. About 20 years ago or less, you are telling a story in the cover because it was related to the inside. But not anymore, because we are doing a lot of variant covers also. The difference, I don't know, is something completely different. In a comic, you develop a story after a script, and in a cover, you think in terms of illustration, and in calling the attention of the reader. That's all.
Now, you've done a lot of superhero work, but you've also done Cinder and Ash, which was a book where folks are wearing regular clothing. It's an action-adventure story. How do you approach a story that is more set in the real world as opposed to the fantastical world of superheroes or Atari Force?
Well, personally, I approach that kind of a story with a smile in my face, because it's the kind of a story I would like to do. I am not too fanatic of superheroes. Then when I got the chance to do something like Cinder and Ash, or let me see, Atari Force or Twilight, or even Road to Perdition, that's the kind of stuff I like to do.
And growing up, who would be the artist that you would look for in the paper, you know, in the comics that made you want to draw?
If I have to make a list, it's going to be a big one, okay? I was brought up in Argentina, and the companies over there, they reprint material from the syndicates, from King Features, from United, whatever. And those artists, the artists working on those syndicates, were the ones I was looking for. Alex Raymond, Harold Foster, Milton Caniff, Bill Sickles, Ken Balt, Stan Drake, whatever, okay? Just when I came to the States, I discovered the superheroes and the people working on superheroes, like Jack Kirby or Joe Kubert.
Matt Fraction is a writer with a diverse resume. Working for Marvel Comics, he brought life to second-tier characters, earning high sales. Working on creator-owned properties, he's mixed genres and won industry awards. I asked Matt about the discipline needed to write multiple and vastly different books each month.
The process is different for each book. I tend to try and stay longhand as long as possible. Something about it being physical helps a lot. There's a lot of wool gathering and sort of daydreaming and thinking, and then it all kind of comes out like there's typing, you know what I mean? Like there's a lot of writing, all is up here for me, and then it's just typing. And I get bored real easily, so I try to write things that are different from every other thing that I'm writing. So it's I always liken it to like cross training. Like one day is arm day, and one day is leg day, and one day is cardio. Like you don't get bored if I can switch it up. And if I'm ahead enough and I have the luxury of time, I can see how I feel that particular day and write whatever I want. And writing for deadline really teaches you how to not be precious. Like that's the best part about working in comics is like you learn, like, oh, it's got to be done now, and otherwise I would work on it forever. I would never publish anything if I had endless publication dates. So you learn the rhythm, and I learned to kind of just promise myself to do better next time, that I'm going to get it good enough, because it's never going to be finished. It's never going to be good enough, but I have to get it out and then go forward and try to learn, and it keeps momentum going. I always want to try and do better than last time. And like the worst day in comics is Wednesday, because it's the day all your mistakes come out and are made permanent forever.
So when you talk about this, because I guess we all have self-doubt, when you look at something later on, it's got to be printed, it's got to be published, it's got to come out. Do you look at something that maybe you had some reservations at, and now you look at it and you think, oh, it's better than I was hoping?
No, I tend to not go back. It was different when I was writing stuff for Marvel, where I need like continuity reference. But no, I tend to not go back once it's done. Just sort of move forward. Because if I look back, I'll find 10 million. I still think about things. Stories I wrote 10 years ago. I'm like, oh, I should have done this. I'll come up with a fix for a problem I had 10 years ago. Like I can't turn it off. So I am not, in fact, my own biggest fan, which helps.
Well, thank you so much. HeroesCon organizers have a great respect for all genres of comics, and the guests in Artist Alley reflect that. Indie comics legend Jaime Hernandez, co-creator of Love and Rockets, spoke to me about his long-running series. I wondered how he approached the 30-something-year friendship of Hopi and Maggie, and about his clean and beautiful art style.
Basically, me and my brother, we wanted to draw comics the kind we wanted to see, because in 1981 there wasn't exactly that much of a variety of comics. It was mostly Marvel and DC or nobody, and we grew up on all kinds of different comics as kids, and we just always thought that there was just a wider variety than just superheroes. And at the same time also, the life I was living was more colorful than comics. I came from a Mexican neighborhood that had its own culture, and I also was in the punk culture. So it was just all this rich stuff going on, and I just decided to just borrow it, just basically drawing what I know. And it evolved. I've always liked character-driven comics, so I liked writing characters and having characters bounce off each other. And so that's why I created Maggie and then her friend Hopi, because I just wanted two characters to just like clash all the time, And the more I did them, the more they grew, and the older I got, the older they got, and it's still fun 35 years later, because they still surprise me,
And your art style, it is reminiscent of the classic Archie style, like a Dan DeCarlo. So was that someone that you had seen the work of, or is it just this is who you are and this is how the characters come out?
I grew up on Archie. I really like the artists. I like Dan DeCarlo, but I really liked Harry Lucy, who was also an artist. I loved their body language and their character interaction. And I was not ashamed to borrow from these kid comics to do my stories. I thought Archie comics had a certain strength that Marvel and DC didn't. It was for teens, but it's still kind of, there was certain truth to the characters that a lot of the Marvel and DC characters didn't have, because it was just superheroes,
And are you a trained artist? I mean, your anatomy is always flawless. You draw some of the most beautiful faces I've ever seen. And of course, the acting, the way that the characters interact on the panel is just masterful. Is this just completely self-taught, or is it again just, maybe you went to school and got a degree or something?
It was mostly self-taught, because in those days you couldn't teach comics. There were no classes to teach how to do comics. So it was mostly self-taught. I mean, I took your standard, life drawing classes in school and drawing classes and things like that. So that helped quite a bit. But most of all, it was just self-taught. I just drew all the time since I was a kid. So I had a lot of training, till by the time I was a young adult, I was ready,
As you walk through Artist Alley, you'll be surprised how many talented artists you'll discover. It's more like a small city. And not everyone works for Marvel or DC or is a household name, but their work is just as compelling and in some cases even more so. I had the chance to speak with Gwen Thompson about her graphic novel, Beautiful Scars.
Beautiful Scars is a collaboration with my partner, Derwin Talon. It tells the story of a granddaughter and a grandfather who connect when he explains the stories behind the scars on his body, and that inspires her to tell her own stories as well. So she kind of tells this fantasy stories that are inspired by this wonderful life that he's lived, which is pretty great. So that kind of ties into how I would describe myself. A storyteller, a creator, an illustrator. I enjoy telling stories of all different kinds, but mostly connecting to a younger audience or an all ages audience, as we like to call it.
Now, you had said that you are a professor teaching art and design. So when you're working on a project like Beautiful Scars, are you doing this during the day as part of your scholarship, or is this something that you are going home and saying, well, you know what, let me sit down at the drawing board?
Sure. So typically this is something that we work on mostly during the summer and during breaks. So I'm the coordinator of the illustration program at Grand Valley State University in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which takes up a lot of my time, as you can imagine. So typically during those 9 months, I'm pretty on board with curriculum and all that kind of good stuff, grading students. So my scholarship typically happens in the summer. That's when the bulk of my work gets done. But during the school year, I'm able to write, I'm able to kind of come up with the stories that are later going to be finished. It's a pretty intensive process.
And it also seems like it's something that I know for me when I work on a project that's outside of what I do academically, it always sort of recharges my batteries and kind of reminds me of why I got into the business in the first place. Do you find that to be the case?
Absolutely. I really do. And I think it's a really good thing for my scholarship, for the teaching aspect of what you have to do in academia. I have to tell my students to do these things, right? I have to say, you need to work every day, you need to get up and be excited about what you do, and if I'm not actually doing that, then I'm a bit of a fraud, right? So it really engages me and energizes me as well. It feeds, both of my practices kind of feed into each other.
And then I guess my last question is going to be, we see a lot of artists today are using technology to create. They're using an iPad or they're using Photoshop or Illustrator to draw. Are you going back to the old school methods of pencil and paper, or are you embracing technology?
Yeah, I would say 99% of what you see on my table is digital, actually. So I'm using Illustrator, I'm using Photoshop, I actually draw with a Cintiq at home, and I have an iPad for on the go. It's actually charging back in the hotel right now, otherwise you'd see it on my desk right here. But I also love working with my hands. I do a lot of tactile kind of things as well, like I'm a big time knitter. And that kind of grew out of actually working digitally, because at the end of the day, you turn off your computer and you don't have anything in front of you, which is a bit bizarre. So I sort of found other ways to get more hands-on. So like the mermaids on the table are actually created in Illustrator, and they're used, I use a laser cutter to sort of cut them out, the forms, and then they're all hand painted and decorated. So it's kind of a marriage between traditional and digital materials, which I think is pretty cool. It doesn't really matter to me what I use to get the end result, as long as I get the end result that I want.
Rick and Morty are popular. As I walked through HeroesCon, I saw a lot of Ricks and even a couple of Morty cosplayers. I'm a fan of the show, so when I saw Kyle Starks from Oni Press's Rick and Morty comic, I asked him about working on a licensed property and about his own creator-owned series, Rock Candy Mountain.
The world building's so nice for Rick and Morty. I actually have a pretty big area to sort of play in as a sandbox. But yeah, like there's certain things I can't do because I can't change the show, right? But I've worked for other licenses, and Rick and Morty's different because I love it so much, and I know the characters, and I love the characters, and therefore I have the stories. I know how to tell their stories, right? So it's great. Rick and Morty's great. I have another one coming out in August that's based on a board game called Dead of Winter. It's dogfighting zombies. It's great. But licensed books are hard compared to doing your own thing because there's lines that you can't cross, whereas with my stuff, I make the lines. I can do whatever I want, which is, I can't kill Morty. I mean, I could actually. I could. I could actually, now that I say that, but I have to bring him back and it'd be a thing, right? So I can't really mess with canon, even though I'm theoretically canonical. It's difficult, but Rick and Morty's great. That's the answer to that. Rick and Morty's the exception to all other licensed books.
And your own stuff, Rock Candy Mountain, what's that about and how did that come about?
Rock Candy Mountain is basically a hobo kung fu movie. The World's Toughest Hobo is looking for Rock Candy Mountain, which is sort of, there's a song, if you don't know, it's from most people know it, but a lot don't. It's basically like Sinner's Heaven. So I actually came up with it. I've been watching a lot of martial arts movies, and there's a genre called wuxia, and there's no American equivalent, and I sort of fell into wanting to figure out what would be the Americanized version of this very specific genre, and this is what came out of it. And I'm stoked about it. It's great. It's fun. It's got action. It's got mystery, hobos, fighting. That's a good one. Yeah,
I love fighting hobos. First off,
everyone does. That's what I'm saying.
So I guess my last question will be, when you're working, are you doing the old school pencil on board, or are you using all the computer stuff that the kids are into these days?
I'm actually 1,000% digital because I'm very, very, very fast that way. I don't have to scan things. I don't have to erase things. I work in a lot of layers just because it lets me move things around like paper dolls. I love digital in terms of productivity. It's probably not fiscally the wisest move because I don't have originals to sell and that type of thing. But you know what I say, be good, be fast, be nice. So I'm fast and nice, and that's what I'm working on. If I got rid of digital, I'd be slow, so I'd only have one of them. And sometimes I'm not that nice, I guess. So, but I love digital, but it does have problems to it. But I think nowadays it's the cleanest, fastest way to do it. So that's what I do. I like digital boys.
Snuffy Smith is a syndicated comic strip that debuted in 1919 and is run in 900 newspapers daily. Now that's a lot of history and a lot of pressure for John Rose, the current cartoonist of the series. I asked John how he was able to assume creative duties for this beloved character and how he approaches a gag-a-day strip.
I worked as an assistant to the gentleman who was the second cartoonist, Fred Lasswell. I worked with him starting in 1998 for about 3.5 years and kind of learned the ropes. He was a wonderful teacher, a wonderful man. Did a lot of inking and learned about the characters. And then when he passed away in 2001, King Feature Syndicate offered me an audition to continue the strip. Along with some other folks. They like my work the best, and I've been doing it ever since. So it's a joy to get to create it every day.
And it is every day. So every day you have to come up with 3 panels, and on Sunday you have to come up with a big color strip. So what's that like deadline-wise? I mean, are you working 9 to 5, or are you working, 8 in the morning to 8:15 or something?
Yeah, 8 to 5 and some nights as well. Yeah, but it's 7 days a week. A joke a day, and to do a daily comic probably takes me about 2 hours, but then to do the Sunday comic can take up to 20 hours, and then you never know how long the writing is going to take. Sometimes you get the idea quickly, and other times it takes a while to come up with a good joke.
And it's a syndicated strip, which means it's distributed to newspapers all across the country. Right. Now, do you get letters from people in faraway places who are telling you how much the strip means to them?
Right. Yeah. It's in the comic strip is I think between 400 and 500 newspapers around the world. It's very popular in Norway, for example. We do a Christmas Snuffy Smith comic book every year for the country of Norway. It comes out in November each year. So it's wonderful to hear and get reaction from readers all over the world. You never know when you're what you're creating in your little studio, in your home studio, you know, the feedback you're going to get from people all over the country and then all over the world as well.
And I see a lot of prints. I'm wondering, when you're working on the strip, are you working pencil, ink on board, or are you using digital methods to get the strip out?
I do, I hand draw everything, and then I scan it in the computer, and once it's scanned in the computer, we color it, manipulate it, like as far as reduce it down in size, and then everything's emailed to King Feature Syndicate.
At the beginning of the program, we mentioned that HeroesCon doesn't book movie stars and celebrities. So you may wonder why Darryl McDaniels, 1/3 of Run DMC, Rock and Roll Hall of Famer, and music icon, was sitting at a booth for DMC Comics. As he told our crew, Darryl is a longtime fan of comics, and well, I'll let Darryl tell you.
Well, a lot of people think that I'm the rapper dude, like most rappers who, you know, get a little bit of success. They think they can do everything. But a lot of rappers have a habit of doing stuff that they shouldn't do to ruin other things, like cultures and genres. But before hip-hop came over the bridge from the Bronx, before 1970s rock and folk rock radio hit my ears as a little kid, sitting there playing with my G.I. Joe, all I did was collect, read, and draw comic books. And this was since kindergarten. I think I brought my first comic book was Batman. And I started with stick figures. And all the artists, all these legendary artists here said, D, we started the same way. Then it went to tracing paper. You go to the, you know, the local store in the corner, the 5 and dime, and buy the tracing paper. By 2nd grade, I didn't need tracing paper anymore. So I used to buy the comic, read it 100 million times, and then just try to draw everything that I saw in it. So that being said, comic books empowered me. I went to Catholic school my whole life. So whether people notice or not, my whole life as a kid was getting bullied, teased, and picked on. Because not only was it crazy growing up in Hollis, Queens, New York, and going to Catholic school, you had to wear a uniform and carry a big book bag that said St. Pascal Baylon Elementary. So automatically you was a mark. So all the bullies and all the public school kids was crazy. They was like, oh, you go to Catholic school, your mother and father's rich, run it. So I got my money taken, lunch money taken, and the whole thing. But comic books, when I made it home, you know, I used to leave school and have to, all right, I gotta make it through the jungle to get home. But when I was at home, comic book was the perfect world for me. I was smart, I was super powered, I traveled the galaxies, you know what I'm saying, the stories, the images, the colors, the characters. It was just the perfect universe for me. And that set me up to be so dominant in hip-hop, because when hip-hop came along, I was like, oh shoot, you could tell stories over music. So all that imagination and creativity from the comic books, automatically those characteristics and those attributes helped me be so dominating on a mic.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So it was comic books first, then it was hip hop, and then about 3 years ago, I actually went to a music meeting. And when I went to the music meeting, I was meeting with Riggs Morales, who was actually Eminem's A&R over at Shady Records. And Eminem, by the way, is just like us. He loves comic books. So we all in this together. So I sat down with Riggs for for this music meeting. He said, before we start this meeting, I'm usually very professional, and he used these words, but yo, DMC, man, you was like my superhero, man, the way you look, the way you sound, and all of that stuff. And he asked me the same thing I just told you. He said, yo, what was it like when you was a kid? And I was like, well, all I did was read and draw and collect comic books. And he was like, comic books? And I was like, yeah, comic books. He said, comic books? I was like, yeah, comic books. We sat there for 3 hours and we talked about comic books. I had DC all over the place, Batman, Superman, Justice League, Wonder Woman, and all of that. Flash was one of my favorite superheroes to draw. But Gotham and Metropolis was fictional. Stan Lee's crazy behind had the superheroes running around New York City. So automatically as a kid, I identified with that. Every time I opened up the Marvel comic book, I got a geography lesson about the city that I lived in. I couldn't go nowhere, I couldn't leave the block, but I got to see New York City. And so it was a New York thing. So that also set me up when the hip hop thing came along. but comic books had taught me, especially Marvel, in life, you describe yourself with an adjective, and then you tell the world who you are, like Amazing Spider-Man, Incredible Hulk. So when hip-hop came along, Darryl McDaniels, the initials of my name is DMC, is not mild-mannered Catholic school kid Darryl McDaniels anymore. I transform into the devastating mic-controlling DMC. On the next record, I'll be the microphone master DMC. You know, I'll be the king of rock on this record. So everything that I got from comic books was like a guideline of how I would present myself in this universe. So comic books is not make-believe. Look at those words right there. Like, I go to high schools, I go to middle schools now, and I talk to the kids. A lot of the kids will hide the fact that they like comics and Star Wars and science and Powerpuff Girls and Transformers and all that, because the perception is, you know, artistic, creative, science fiction, imaginary things isn't cool. But as a matter of fact, it's the coolest things on the face of the earth. Everything that we do here, we're the creators of all the stories, all the movies, all the tech, everything that the so-called gangsters and thugs want, we originators of that. They wouldn't have a world if it wasn't for us. So I go around telling these kids at school that this make-believe is real. Look at the words right there, make-believe, make-believe. You make the world believe it. And all I was doing my whole hip-hop career was pretending to be the most powerful entity in the hip-hop universe. It was all make-believe, but to me, since it was real in my mind, it came true in this realm. And after meeting with Riggs, he was like, yo, you should do a comic book. And I said, nah, I don't want to do a comic book. And he said, why not? And just like I told you, I said, I don't want to be another rapper just because I got a hit record trying to do something else. Because us geeks and nerds, we are very critical. Don't be coming up in here trying to F up stuff. Marvel is lucky. I mean, Hollywood is lucky they getting the Marvel movies right. You know what I'm saying? They get a pass right now. DC got to step up their game a little bit. We still rooting for them, but we take everything seriously because all of this, you know, the geeks, the nerds, TV, science fiction, Star Wars, Doctor Who, this is a culture. This is a nation of people. You know what I'm saying? So we have to do things with integrity. So Riggs convinced me to do the comic book by saying this. He said, yo, D, that's very honorable of you, but he said, yo, you can do the same things, the very same thing you've been doing with your music all these years. You could do with a comic book and more. And I was like, what? Inspire, educate, motivate, and entertain. And I never looked at it like that, because I always said the comic books is my thing. I'm drawing my pictures, and these are my comic books. But he said the same way you shared your stories and that representation with the music, you could do with the comic books. So he convinced me 3 years ago to start a comic book company, and he said, if you had to start a company, what would you name it? You can't do Marvel and DC because that's already taken, and Image and all of that. And then the whole DMC clicked again. I was like, I'll call it DMC Comic Books. He was like, what does that mean? Darryl makes comics. So everything organically fell into place, because I think the reason why we're on the 3rd issue and people respect us is because the whole idea for my company is to do a celebration and a tribute of what makes all comics great. So every comic that Riggs liked, every comic that I liked, and every comic that my other editor, Edgardo Miranda Rodriguez, liked, you know what I'm saying? We're 3 different kids from 3 different areas of New York City, but we had this in common. So all of the images, ideas, concepts that motivated and captivated us is the very same platform we want to put into this book. So when I do the books, we always make sure we have one artist and writer that is known to the universe, so y'all can respect us. You know what I'm saying? But each issue will also have 3 or 4 up-and-coming artists that nobody knows about, because I wanted to create a vehicle for everybody, whoever wanted to have their stuff published in the book. I want to give them that opportunity.
That's fantastic.
So that's why I'm actually here at the HeroesCon in North Carolina.
Comic characters have great costumes. Usually memorable and visually stunning, many fans are inspired to create real-life versions of their favorite 4-color heroes. It's known as cosplay. I asked noted cosplayer DJ Spiderkit to share her insights about this increasingly popular section of comic fandom.
I see today you're wearing Dazzler from the original design, and the other day I saw you wearing Rachel Summers from the early X-Men appearance. So what is it about cosplay that draws you in?
It's really one of those things where being able to be somebody else that you've been like, who's been your hero or somebody you read. It's like Halloween just amped up. You get to put somebody else on, and for a while I can be super shiny, you know, I can be, oh, I'm probably blinding you. I can be super shiny, I can be filled with attitude, you know, I feel like a superhero, and then I can go home and I can take it off and just drop it on the laundry, and then I'm like, okay, I'm back to me again. But it's like having a secret identity, and it's fun to just run around and then see other people's faces light up when they see their favorites walk around. It's neat.
Now, I've noticed you have a sort of a soft spot for the obscure characters, the obscure costumes.
Yeah.
So what is it about someone like, I see a Troya costume back there, about those oddball designs? Why does that draw you in?
I found comics in like the 80s and 90s. So like my sweet spot sort of like that middle to late 80s, early 90s, where costumes got really like bizarre. But those are the ones I first got. Those are the ones that I fell in love with first. So like Dazzler, this was her first one. That's the first time I knew her. The first time I saw Zatanna was the Perez design with the red lobster on the head, you know, concept with the big sleeves. I see her in fishnets and I'm like, no, that's not right. That looks like she's, you know, in chorus line. That was the superhero costume for me. So I've just sort of gravitated for them. And also there's the challenge of like some of these things just look ridiculous. And I'm like, I wonder how that would actually look, could you make that? So like I did Looker from The Outsiders, which somebody once described as a Neapolitan ice cream cone that somebody smacked a bow on. And that's just like there's one long leg, there's one short leg, there's one long arm, there's one short arm, then they added a chain and they added a cape and they put blue eyes on her and then they literally smacked a bow on it. And I'm like, that's ridiculous. Let's do that. So it's the challenge of doing something that's a little bit weird, but it's also like, I just want to know what that would look like. Is that really a valid design? Could you translate that from the page to something like three-dimensional? So yeah, it's part of the challenge. It's the fun part.
And yesterday you were taking charge of the cosplay photos here on the big stage. So how did you get involved with that here at HeroesCon?
So about 2009, 2008, I would start collecting my friends just to take a photo. Hey, we're all in costume, we should get a photo together. And then we invited more people and more people. So the first year we did it, we had like 9 people. And then we had about 20 people. And then suddenly we had like almost 100 people. And then we're like, we should probably organize something. So then we were doing the shoots outside because they wouldn't let us do it inside anymore at the convention center because we were a security hazard with people watching and then people just blocking hallways. So we moved it outside. It's Charlotte, it's June, the weather is terrible. It's iffy and it's hot. So I talked to Shelton and the team at Heroes. I'm like, could we do something inside? Could we do a contest? Could we like really start to do some stuff? And so we got a stage and the stage just it was too small. So last year we got all this space. They gave us a whole separate hall to support all the cosplay stuff. And they've been really just wonderful about it. They love seeing it. The creators, the artists love seeing their work like come to life and walk by. They get super excited, which is a lot of fun. And it's just really just amped up in a lot of ways. I kind of just went with it, and now we have a whole hall. So yeah, I think it's also a reflection though of culture and society in general. I think because the geeks have finally inherited the earth and we're finally like awesome. Everybody's kind of jumping in with both feet and they're all testing waters. I love seeing, like, especially with the costume contest, I love seeing the new people taking their first steps out there and trying new things, and then they come back, you know, the next year and their skill levels have amped up. A friend of mine, he's like, I'm just gonna make one costume. Make one costume. That was on Friday. By Saturday he was already planning his second one. You know, he just was kind of like, I'm just gonna try this. I'm like, yep, you've fallen down the rabbit hole. It's just gonna keep spiraling down from there. But it's sharing information, it's sharing, you know, just watching like the skill levels. And I just get blown away. Like last year there was a Hulkbuster that walked in here and we all just went, how did you do that? You know, because it's a Hulkbuster. You know, for me, I work in spandex, but to see like metals and leathers and foam, and it was mind-boggling. So yeah, I get excited by it. It's like, you know, I'm a fan too. I'll chase people down. I'm like, ooh, come here, see what you got. So yeah, it just kind of just developed, and the cosplay has just grown, and now it's all one big happy family.
Like I said at the beginning of the show, we spent 3 days at HeroesCon, but that still wasn't enough time for me to speak with as many comic creators and fans as I wanted to. Fortunately, Jamie Liddy was part of the comic culture team, and she was able to talk with a variety of artists and writers about their approach to comics. Up first, her conversation with syndicated cartoonist Keith Knight, whose politically charged comics are both profound and funny.
I came up with my comic strip because there was a lack of representation in the comics of someone that looks like me. You know, I often say that dogs and cats have better representation in the comics than black people do. So it was really important for me to draw myself and my friends and sort of and do an autobiographical comic strip. So and I just basically built sort of this whole my business on doing autobio and political stuff. And so I don't do a whole lot of work for hire. I guess the closest it would be this book, Jake the Fake, Keeps It Real, which is a new book that just came out that I collaborated with Craig Robinson and Adam Mansbach. They wrote it, I illustrated it, and but I had a huge role in sort of developing the character and the way it looks and all that stuff. So, hopefully down the line someone else is going to be hired to draw the character. I love collaboration because there were ideas that I was in a band before when I was just starting out as a cartoonist, and I thought it was such a great balance being a cartoonist where you control everything, and then being in a band where you threw out ideas and then it bounced it off everybody else and it created something much greater than what you came up with. And I love that idea of working with other people on a collaborative project and it becoming something that I never expected. I have an editor with my daily cartoon, The Nightlife, so I send my stuff off and the syndicate editor will let me know what flies and what doesn't fly. And sometimes I work, if I submit to, say, Forbes or a few other different places, Mad Magazine, they'll have some feedback, and a lot of the feedback makes it better. Sometimes they do stuff about police brutality, so I'll see it in the news. Sometimes there's just some wacky, sometimes I'll get some hate mail that's great, and I'll make a comic out of that, It's, I did one, a colleague of mine got some hate mail, Clay Butler, and it was just so good. So I just drew the guy just saying, it was a guy who said, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I hope you get cancer. Like, this guy wrote to this artist, and I've gotten that too, like, I hope you get cancer. And I just drew this guy, sitting there contemplating, like, I can't believe it, I'm going to say this, but I hope you get cancer, And by the end, he writes, Merry Christmas, MF. It's just like, it's great as a cartoonist. If you're depressed, if you're frustrated, you can put it into your art. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't have that. So they get guns and they go around and shoot people. That's the great thing about our medium is we can express ourselves and I can just draw someone shooting someone in a comic, and then it's, that's satiated. I don't need to do it in real life. Yeah, catharsis. So, I think everyone should do cartooning because I think it's great therapy. Not everyone has to see it, My best work, most people don't see.
When Jamie and I planned our shoot, we thought of a theme to our questions. We wanted to know how artists approach creating comics with stories and characters they create versus a work-for-hire book. In this segment, Jamie speaks with Adam Cozart, the artist behind Skylin and Mr. Ballsy, followed by Anthony Spey, who left Zenescope Entertainment to create his own series, New and Improved. Finally, Jamie spoke with artist Randall Trang, who balances a day job as a stuntman with creating his own comic, Roller Girl and the Flying Sidekick.
I actually do a comic for Quran, which I created the characters, they wrote the story. But even though I created the characters, once I'm formatted their story, it's not as fun as just being able to have complete creative control. Even creating my own characters, it kind of tightens it down when you don't have absolute control. But there's just a freedom to having absolute control and just being able to create whatever you want. But it's still enjoyable doing anything. It's still enjoyable doing Batman or other characters as well.
How do you find ways to please yourself or sneak something in to an established property?
Usually I try to sneak as much in, or not sneak in, I try to add as much in like animals in the background, little comical things just to entertain me and to entertain anybody who finds it. That's very entertaining. It keeps the creative juices going.
Like sight gags?
Yeah. Instead of just going straight by script and just hammering out like a factory worker.
How'd you get into illustrating?
I actually started last year. I started an Instagram account last year. This company out of San Diego picked me up. We're working on the second book now, and this is actually my first convention as an artist. So I'm enjoying it so far.
What a once-in-a-career career goal originally?
No, I'm actually a cop.
Oh, you were a criminal
So-
justice major or something? Or what?
No, I'm a canine officer, and that's just I've been in that for about 15 years now. And I've always done this a little bit as a hobby and decided last year to take it just a little further. And that's where I'm at now.
And you were discovered online, or an agent found you, or what?
Yeah, a few independent companies contacted me from Instagram. And I've been working with a couple since then. And slowly, because the full-time job takes effect over that.
Right, and is it all, pen and ink and wash, or do you do any digital?
Almost everything I do is digital. I just started doing some pen and ink just for the convention. And I'm going to start doing some more of that. But I doodled before, but since I got in with the comics, everything, I do full coloring and everything digital.
And what software do you use, and how do you think it frees you up? Or?
I use an iPad Pro with an Apple Pencil, and I use the Medibang Paint app. I think it's a free app, and it's nice. I take it anywhere, and it's amazing how much an app now has the technology that used to have to pay $400 for a program. So yeah, I do everything on that, and it's nice. I'll go to a coffee shop and draw, and a lot of freedom.
For me, first and foremost, I like the drawing aspect of it. I'm a bit of a technician, so just if I can do a good job of something, that I enjoy that already without any of like the creativity, like as far as coming up with ideas and stuff like that. But usually, I've been lucky enough when I've worked that people, they trust me to give them a pretty good to like use my mind to have some leeway with the ideas. You know, I like going back and forth with the editor and discussing ideas and different things like that. So if there's a way I think I can improve something, or if I have an idea, for the most part so far who I've worked with, they've been pretty good about like working with me. So I do get some input and stuff like that. So.
How'd you get into the field?
I always loved comic books. I mean, I studied art in college as a double major, and then I went back to a graduate school for sequential art, which is comics and storyboarding and things like that. So after that, I just pounded the pavement. I went around to different conventions like this, getting portfolio reviews from different editors, and eventually I got a job as a freelancer, and for a company called Zenoscope, I became their art director after that, and got a lot of experience in a lot of different areas of comic books there, and then I've since gone freelance again, and I'm using that, putting that experience to good use. So that's kind of how it's worked out for me so far.
Where'd you do your sequential art degree, and do you think creativity can be taught?
I don't think creativity can be taught, but in order to express it in a way that will, either make you any money or be able to make a living doing it, you need to have the skills to back it up. Creativity is great. I mean, there's a lot of good idea people out there, but if you can't transfer those ideas to a format that will make people want to read it or view your artwork or whatever, then, I mean, it's great to have ideas on your own for yourself, but as far as coming to a show or doing something like this, it's still a media, like something that the public needs to consume.
I've been doing comics forever. This is actually my longest job has been comics. I've been doing it since I was like 16. But yeah, whenever I'm not working in comics and I'm not sitting down and drawing, I'm going around and doing those other jobs.
Do you work for other people or just yourself?
Mostly myself, because those are the type of projects I do, and that's actually why I work the day job. I used to do more work for hire stuff for other people, but it wound up being too demanding for not very fulfilling work. So I started doing it on my own, and I enjoyed it a lot more. And I had a day job already that I really enjoyed, teaching martial arts, running a school, and stuff like that. So it just
How
made
do you
more sense.
think creativity differs when it's work for hire on someone else's property versus your own?
Mostly the difference is the collaborative process. Doing my own stuff, I do it on my own. I write and draw. So that process is it can be very lonely, but it's really easy for me to make changes on the fly or to do it exactly the way I want to do it. It's also easier trying it's easier to move around. It's very flexible. So if something doesn't work for me that particular week, I don't have to tell anybody I'm pushing a deadline back. I just push the deadline. And as far as the content of what I'm doing goes, I don't have to run it by anybody. I don't have an editor above me. I self-publish too, so I don't even have to answer the publishers or anything like that. When I do work for hire stuff, depending on who I work with, the pay is different, but there's also just the creative process, depending on which publisher I'm working for, can be very, very different. So some publishers are more demanding and very controlling about what's going on the page. Some are very kind of just hands-off, do whatever you want. And of course deadlines are pretty much, they don't move. So I gotta either do the work or I don't get paid. So yeah, it's a lot more stressful sometimes than work.
So collaboration can be fun or a pain?
It can be both. Like I've definitely had a lot of fun doing work for hire. I'm not cramping on work for hire stuff at all. I love doing it. It's just very different and it's not as flexible. Like with me, all my different day jobs that I do, it's a lot more sensible for me to do kind of just self-publish stuff. It's flexible.
Cool. Can you sneak something in, or like how do you please yourself when you're working on someone else's property? You know, what can you put little Easter eggs to yourself in there, or little sight gags?
Usually being the artist, it's we have a lot of control. We have all the control of what goes on the page. So even though we get a script, it's really easy for me to just say, you know, that doesn't work visually, and I'll tell the writer that, you know, something is not feasible. Like they'll write a script where they have like 10 different things happening in one panel, and I'll just say, it's like, no, that's not feasible. This is how I would do it, and I give them a thumbnail sketch. So there is a lot of creativity that goes into collaborative work, and there's a lot of creative freedom that goes into it. So I'm not complaining about it. It's just this is a different experience.
Are you self-taught, and do you think creativity can be taught?
I'm mostly self-taught. Yeah, I did go to school for art, but it's not like they like sat down and taught you how to draw. It's just kind of the art program that I was in was kind of more freeform, and they were interested more in your conceptual ideas and things like that. In terms of the actual techniques of illustration, a lot of that was self-taught. But yeah, I think that creativity is something that you may be more like inclined to do. Like you may be born to do it, but talent and all that stuff. Some of it is innate, but I think that it all just comes with practice. It's like no one told me to draw when I was 4 years old. I just decided to do it, and those people just tend to be more kind of like technically sound illustrators just because they've been doing it for long. I guess if you were forced to draw at 4 years old, you'd have the same kind of level of talent as someone that is just inclined to draw. But when it's more fun, you do it more. And if you just kind of just are inclined to think drawing is fun, then you just wind up doing more and you wind up getting better. It's kind of like that.
I hope you've enjoyed this special episode of Comic Culture. If you're interested in attending this year's HeroesCon, mark the weekend of June 15th, 2018 on your calendar. There's plenty of time for you to make that awesome costume for the cosplay contest. Thanks for watching Comic Culture. We'll see you soon.